The war-weary cowboy slept, then woke and froze to find the town's widow in his bed. The war on the frontier was over for him, at least on paper, but it still followed him home like a shadow that refused to let go. The town looked smaller than he remembered. The main road was the same strip of dirt, lined with wooden buildings that leaned slightly with age. The general store still stood on the corner, its sign faded and cracked. The saloon door creaked in the wind, though no music spilled out like it used to. Everything felt quieter, as if the town itself had learned how to hold its breath. People noticed him right away. A man returning after years away could never pass unseen. A shopkeeper paused mid-sweep. A woman pulling water from the well stopped and stared. Some faces showed curiosity, others caution, and a few carried something close to pity. They had heard stories about the fighting, about men who came back changed. Some never came back at all. He tipped his hat out of habit, though his eyes stayed low. He was not ready for questions. He was not ready for the careful kindness or the awkward silence that followed it. All he wanted was a place to sleep where the night would not explode into gunfire inside his head. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, just beyond the church. It was run by an older woman who had lost her husband long ago and her patients not long after that. She did not ask him about the war. She only asked if he had money and if he planned to cause trouble. When he answered no to the second question, she nodded and handed him a key. The room was small and plain. A narrow bed, a wooden chair, a wash basin by the window. It smelled faintly of soap and old wood. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he felt something close to relief. He set his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might offer answers. As night fell, the town settled into its usual quiet. A distant laugh drifted from the saloon, then faded. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. He washed the dust from his face and hands, watching the water turn brown before running clear. The man in the mirror looked older than he felt, or maybe younger in a way that made him uneasy. His eyes held too much. Sleep did not come easily. It never did anymore. When he closed his eyes, the past pressed in. The long rides, the shouting, the sudden moments where everything changed in a breath. He lay still, listening to the sounds of the building, reminding himself that he was safe, that this was a bed and not the hard ground, that the silence meant peace, not danger. Eventually, exhaustion won. It always did. The next morning, he woke early as if his body had forgotten how to rest fully. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, painting pale lines across the floor. For a moment, he felt almost normal. Then the weight returned, settling into his chest as he sat up. He went downstairs for coffee. The boarding house kitchen was quiet except for the sound of a kettle. A few other guests sat at the table, nodding politely but not speaking much. In a small town, news traveled fast, but respect often showed itself in silence. After breakfast, he stepped outside and walked the length of the main road. He needed to see it all again to remind himself that this place was real and still standing. The blacksmith looked up and gave a short nod. The church door was open, sunlight spilling onto the steps. He did not go inside, but he paused there longer than he meant to. As he walked, memories surfaced without warning. He remembered the town as it was before he left, louder, warmer, full of easy laughter. He remembered people who were no longer there. Some had moved on. Some had been buried under simple stones with names carved too soon. That was when he noticed how often one name was spoken in low tones. The widow. He did not hear her name at first, only the careful way people spoke, the slight pause before changing the subject. Loss had touched this town more than once while he was gone, and hers was a loss everyone remembered. Her husband had been well-liked, steady and kind, the sort of man people trusted. His death had left a space no one quite knew how to fill. He had known her before the war. Not well, but enough. She had been friendly in a quiet way, her smile reserved but warm. Back then she had still been newly married, her future looking safe and sure. Thinking of it now made something tighten in his chest. He pushed the thought away and kept walking. By midday, the sun grew stronger and the town stirred. Wagons rolled in. Voices rose. Life continued as it always did, even after everything else had fallen apart. He found work helping unload supplies, not because he needed the money right away, but because keeping busy kept his thoughts from drifting where they did not belong. The work was honest and familiar. His hands remembered what to do even when his mind wandered. Sweat ran down his back and his muscles burned in a way that felt real and grounding. For a few hours, he was just a man doing a job, not a soldier, not a survivor. Still, he felt eyes on him now and then. People watched him when they thought he was not looking. They wondered what he had seen, what he had done, and whether he was the same man who had left. He wondered that too. As the afternoon faded, he returned to his room. Fatigue wrapped around him again, heavier than before. He sat on the bed and removed his boots slowly, as if rushing might break something fragile inside him. Outside, the town moved toward evening, toward supper and small comforts. He lay back and stared at the ceiling. The boards above him creaked softly, and the sound was oddly calming. He thought about staying. He thought about leaving. Both ideas felt equally uncertain. This town was his home, but it was also a place filled with reminders of who he used to be. The war had taken years from him, but it had also taken something harder to name. Coming back did not give it back. As darkness crept in again, he realized how alone he truly felt. Not just without company, but without direction. He had survived when others had not, and now he had to figure out what to do with that fact. The thought weighed on him more than any pack he had carried. He closed his eyes, not to sleep yet, but to rest them. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would decide something. Tomorrow, he would speak more, maybe even smile. Tomorrow felt safer when it stayed in the future. Down the road, a lamp flickered on in a nearby house. Somewhere, a woman stood alone with her own thoughts and memories, her life also shaped by loss. He did not know it yet, but their paths, once lightly crossed, were slowly drawing closer again. For now, he lay still in the quiet room, breathing in the scent of old wood and soap, holding on to the simple truth that he had made it back alive. That alone would have to be enough for the night. The widow's house stood a little apart from the others, close enough to town to hear its daily sounds, yet far enough to feel separate from it. The paint on the wooden walls had begun to fade, not from neglect, but from time passing quietly. The small garden in front was neat, though simple, with more soil than flowers. It reflected the woman who lived there, orderly, careful, and reserved. She woke each morning before the sun rose fully, not because she had to, but because sleep no longer stayed with her for long. The quiet hours before dawn were the hardest. They left too much space for memory. She would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sky slowly change color, reminding herself that another day had begun and that she was still here to meet it. Her husband had been gone for 3 years. The town remembered the accident clearly. A sudden moment, a mistake no one could undo. At first, people had surrounded her with concern and support. Meals were brought, kind words were offered. But as time passed, life moved on for everyone else while hers seemed to remain paused in the same place. She did not blame them. Everyone carried their own burdens. Still, the silence that followed was heavy. During the day, she kept busy. She mended clothes for neighbors, helped at the church when asked, and visited the market regularly. People greeted her kindly, though often with a softness that made her feel fragile, even when she was not. She smiled politely, spoke when spoken to, and avoided lingering conversations. Being alone felt easier than explaining feelings she could barely name herself. She had once imagined a different life, one filled with shared mornings, long talks, and plans made together. Now decisions were hers alone, and that freedom felt less like a gift and more like a responsibility she had not asked for. Some nights, she missed even the small things, the sound of someone else moving through the house, the comfort of knowing another presence was near. On the day the cowboy returned to town, she heard about it before she saw him. News traveled fast, especially news that stirred old memories. Someone mentioned his name in passing at the market, and it caught her attention in a way she had not expected. She kept her expression calm, but inside something shifted. She remembered him from years ago before the war. He had been quieter then but steady. They had spoken only a few times, usually in polite exchanges during town gatherings. There had been nothing dramatic, nothing promised, yet his presence had left an impression. It was the kind of memory that stayed gentle and unfinished. She told herself it meant nothing now. Time had changed everything. That evening, as she closed her shutters, she thought she saw him passing at the end of the road. She could not be sure. The light was fading and her eyes might have been playing tricks on her. Still, her heart beat faster than usual, and she stood there longer than necessary, watching the empty space where he had been. Days passed, and his return became part of the town's quiet talk. Some spoke of how tired he looked. Others wondered if he would stay. She listened without asking questions, gathering pieces of information without meaning to. Each small detail made the image of him clearer in her mind, and she did not know whether that comforted or unsettled her. She did not seek him out. That would have felt too forward, too noticeable. Instead, she focused on her routines. She cleaned the house thoroughly, rearranging things that did not truly need changing. She told herself it was only to keep busy, but deep down she knew she was restless. One afternoon, she went to the church to help prepare for a small gathering. As she arranged the benches, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, she saw him standing in the doorway, hat in hand, uncertain whether to step inside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked different from how she remembered. Thinner, perhaps, and more worn by experience. Yet there was something familiar in his posture, in the way he held himself. She noticed the hesitation in his eyes, as if he were measuring his place in the world all over again. She broke the silence first, greeting him politely as she would anyone else. Her voice sounded steady, though her hands trembled slightly. He responded in the same careful manner, respectful and distant, as if both of them understood the need for caution. They spoke briefly about ordinary things, the weather, the town, how long it had been. Nothing personal. Nothing that reached too deep. When the conversation ended, he nodded and left, and she stood there afterward, surprised by how much that small exchange had affected her. That night, she found it harder than usual to settle down. She sat at the table with her sewing, but her stitches were uneven. Her thoughts kept returning to the doorway of the church, to the look in his eyes that mirrored something she felt herself. Weariness, uncertainty. A quiet longing she did not dare name. She reminded herself that loneliness could make memories feel larger than they were. She had lived alone long enough to know how the mind filled empty spaces. Still, the feeling did not fade easily. As the weeks went on, their paths crossed occasionally. Sometimes it was a nod in the street. Other times, a brief word exchanged while passing. Each interaction was small, but together they formed a thread that slowly wove itself into her daily life. She noticed that he never stayed long in one place, that he seemed to move through town as if unsure where he belonged. She recognized that feeling all too well. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly. Rain fell hard, drumming against roofs and windows. She had stayed late at the market, and by the time she left, the streets were nearly empty. As she hurried along the road, she slipped in the mud and nearly fell. A hand caught her arm, steadying her. It was him. He said little, only asked if she was all right. She nodded, embarrassed more than hurt. They stood there awkwardly, rain soaking them both, until he offered to walk her home. She hesitated, then agreed, knowing it would look odd to refuse help under such circumstances. They walked in silence at first, the rain filling the space between them. When they reached her gate, she thanked him and turned to go inside. Something in his expression stopped her. He looked as if he wanted to say more but did not know how. Without fully thinking it through, she invited him to step inside for a moment, just to dry off. It felt like a small kindness, nothing more. He hesitated again, then accepted. Inside, the house felt different with another person there. Not crowded, but changed. She offered him a towel and put water on to boil. They spoke quietly, keeping the conversation safe and simple, yet beneath the surface there was an awareness neither could ignore. She realized then how long it had been since she had shared space with someone who understood loss without explanation. He did not ask questions she could not answer. He did not look at her with pity. He simply existed there, equally worn, equally careful. When the rain eased, he stood to leave. She felt an unexpected sense of disappointment, though she hid it well. They exchanged polite words again, and he stepped back into the night. After he left, she stood alone in the quiet house, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps. Her heart felt heavier and lighter at the same time. She knew that whatever was forming between them was fragile and complicated, shaped by past pain and present uncertainty. She also knew that in a town like this, nothing stayed hidden for long. As she prepared for bed, she wondered whether inviting him inside had been a mistake or a small act of courage. The line between the two felt thin. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, aware that something had shifted in her carefully balanced life. Loneliness had shaped her days for years, but now it had company. Not comfort exactly, but recognition. Somewhere in town, he lay awake too, carrying his own thoughts, his own memories. Neither of them knew where this path would lead. They only knew that, without meaning to, they had taken the first quiet step toward each other. The night settled quietly over the town, the kind of quiet that felt deeper than silence. Clouds covered the moon and the streets lay dark and empty. In his small room above the boarding house, the cowboy finally slept more deeply than he had in days. Exhaustion pulled him under, past uneasy dreams, into a stillness that felt almost safe. He did not hear the storm return. He did not hear the wind rise or the rain begin again, softer this time but steady. His body, worn from work and worry, stayed heavy and unmoving. For once, his mind did not wander. It simply rested. Down the road, the widow sat awake in her house, listening to the rain tap against the window. She had tried to sleep, but her thoughts would not settle. The evening replayed itself again and again in her mind. The walk home, the quiet talk, the way the house had felt less empty for a short while. She told herself she was only tired, that loneliness could make simple moments feel larger than they were. Still, sleep refused to come. The rain grew stronger near midnight. Water began to pool along the road, and thunder rolled low in the distance. She rose from her bed and moved through the house, checking the windows, making sure everything was secure. When she reached the back door, she noticed that the latch had loosened in the wind. As she fixed it, a sudden sound made her pause. A sharp crack echoed from outside, followed by the heavy fall of something large. Her heart jumped. She waited, listening closely. The sound did not repeat, but the feeling of unease stayed. Living alone taught a person to trust small warnings. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, peering into the dark. The old tree near the fence had lost a large branch, which now lay across the path. Rain soaked her shoes almost at once. She turned back toward the house, meaning to wait until morning, but another thought crossed her mind. The boarding house roof was old. She remembered people talking about leaks during storms like this one. Before she could talk herself out of it, she made a decision. She would walk over and warn the owner, nothing more. It was late, yes, but storms did not wait for morning. She told herself it was only a neighborly thing to do. The walk felt longer in the rain. Her shawl grew heavy and the hem of her dress darkened with water. By the time she reached the boarding house, she was cold and uncomfortable, and her confidence had faded. She hesitated at the door, wondering if she should turn back. Then she heard raised voices inside. The boarding house owner was awake. She knocked, softly at first, then louder. When the door opened, the older woman looked tired and annoyed, but not surprised. After hearing the reason for the visit, she sighed and muttered something about old buildings and bad weather. She thanked the widow and said she would check the roof in the morning. As the widow turned to leave, the owner studied her for a moment, then frowned. "You're soaked," she said. "There's no sense going back out in this mess right now." The hallway was dim, lit by a single lamp. She stood there uncertainly, not sure where to go. The owner gestured toward an empty chair near one of the rooms. "Sit there," she said. "I'll bring you something warm." Her thoughts drifted again, and without meaning to, her gaze settled on the door of his room. She did not know why she looked. She only knew that she did. A moment later, the owner returned, handed her a cup, and told her she could lie down for a while if she needed to. "He won't mind," the woman said casually. "He sleeps like the dead." But the owner was already moving away, clearly done with the matter. The storm outside grew louder, as if pushing her toward a choice. Her clothes were still damp, and the chair felt hard and unwelcoming. She told herself she would only sit on the edge of the bed, nothing more, just until the rain eased. She opened the door quietly. The room was dark, lit only by faint light from the window. He lay on the bed, fully dressed, breathing slow and even. For a moment she stood frozen, unsure whether to step inside or close the door again. She felt foolish, careless, and suddenly very aware of how this might look, but turning back now felt impossible. She stepped in and sat on the edge of the bed, keeping as much distance as she could. The mattress dipped slightly under her weight, but he did not stir. She wrapped the shawl tighter around herself and waited. Time passed strangely. The rain continued. The room stayed quiet. Her body, exhausted from tension and lack of sleep, began to relax against her will. She leaned back slightly, meaning only to rest for a moment. That moment stretched. When the cowboy woke, it was sudden and complete. His eyes opened and his body tensed before his mind fully caught up. It took him a few seconds to realize where he was. The room, the bed, the quiet. Then he became aware of another presence. He froze. Someone was there, lying stiff and unmoving beside him, fully clothed but unmistakably real. His heart raced, and for a brief, terrible instant, his thoughts jumped to darker places shaped by war and fear. He turned his head slowly, careful not to startle whoever it was. When he recognized her, confusion replaced fear. She was awake too now, eyes wide, breath held. For a second, neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy, thick with questions and unspoken worries. He began, then stopped, unsure what to say. She sat up at once, pulling away as if burned. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice shaking. I didn't plan." The misunderstanding. As she spoke, his confusion eased, replaced by something closer to concern. He could see how uncomfortable she was, how close she was to tears. When she finished, they sat there in silence again, both staring at the floor. "I should go," she said finally. He nodded, standing at once. "I'll walk you." "I can manage." He stood alone in the room long after the door closed, listening to the storm fade into the distance. His hands shook slightly, though he could not say why. Relief, perhaps, or the aftershock of fear, or something deeper. Down the road, the widow walked home slowly, her thoughts heavy. The rain had eased, but the night felt colder than before. She replayed the moment of waking again and again, the look on his face, the silence that followed. By morning, the storm was gone, but its mark remained. Both of them knew that something fragile had been tested in the dark. Nothing improper had happened, yet the situation carried weight all the same. In a town like this, even silence could speak loudly. They would both wake the next day knowing that things could not stay exactly as they were. The question was not what had happened, but what would happen next, and whether honesty and care would be enough to protect them from the judgments waiting just beyond the door. Morning came gently, as if the world itself wanted to give them time to breathe. The sky was pale and clear, the air washed clean by the storm. Birds returned to their songs, and the town slowly woke, unaware of the quiet tension resting beneath the surface. The cowboy rose early. Sleep had not returned after she left. He washed his face and stared at his reflection longer than usual. The man looking back at him seemed unsure, caught between relief and worry. Nothing wrong had happened, yet his chest felt tight, as if he had narrowly avoided something dangerous, not danger of the body but of the heart. Downstairs, the boarding house owner moved about as usual. She said nothing about the night before, and he was grateful for that. Silence, for now, felt like protection. He took his coffee and stepped outside, letting the cool air steady him. Across town, the widow stood by her window watching the morning unfold. She had returned home safely, but rest had never come. Her thoughts circled endlessly, touching fear, embarrassment, and something quieter that made her uneasy. She knew how easily stories grew in a place like this. A look, a pause, a rumor, any of it could grow beyond control. She decided she would not hide. Hiding often made things worse. Later that morning they saw each other on the main road. It was not planned, it rarely was. He was carrying supplies for the store and she was walking back from the market. When their eyes met, both stopped. For a moment the world seemed to hold still. He spoke first, his voice calm but careful. "Good morning." People passed them, nodding politely, unaware of the weight behind such simple words. They stood there, uncertain how to move forward until she spoke again. "We should talk," she said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, I think we should." The sun warmed the wood beneath them, and the sound of town life moved around them like a steady river. She explained again, more clearly this time, not rushed by fear. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he told her how he had woken, how his past sometimes made sudden moments feel sharper than they were. They spoke honestly, not as a man and a woman bound by expectation, but as two people shaped by loss. "There was no harm meant," she said softly. "I know," he answered, "and none done." Still, something remained, a quiet understanding that they could not simply return to pretending nothing had changed. In the days that followed, the town watched closely. Some noticed the careful distance they kept. Others noticed the respect. Rumors did not spread as quickly as either had feared, perhaps because nothing truly scandalous existed to fuel them. People sensed restraint, not secrecy. The cowboy continued his work. He repaired fences, helped where he was needed, and slowly became part of the town again. His presence grew familiar, less watched, more accepted. The war still lived in his memories, but it no longer ruled every moment. The widow returned to her routines as well, though something inside her had shifted. She felt stronger for having faced the situation with honesty. Loneliness still visited her, but it no longer felt like a permanent condition. It felt like something that could change. They spoke often now, sometimes briefly, sometimes longer. Conversations grew easier. They shared stories, careful at first, then more open. They did not rush anything. Both understood how fragile healing could be. One evening, weeks later, they walked together along the edge of town. The sky was wide and orange, the land stretching endlessly ahead. Neither spoke for a while. "I don't know what comes next," he said finally. She nodded. "Neither do I." "Nor do I." That was harder to judge. As seasons changed, the cowboy felt something he had not felt since before the war, a sense of direction. Not certainty, but purpose. He was no longer just surviving. He was living again, step by step. The widow found peace in small things, shared walks, quiet talks, the comfort of being seen without being pitied. She learned that strength did not mean standing alone forever. It meant choosing wisely who to let close. In the end, nothing dramatic marked their turning point. No grand moment announced a new beginning. Instead, it was found in steady days, in trust built slowly, and in the understanding that life, even after great loss, could offer something gentle and true. The night that once threatened them became just another memory, important not for what almost went wrong, but for what it revealed. Two tired souls had faced fear, chosen honesty, and found a way forward without losing their dignity. And in a small town shaped by hardship and hope, that quiet victory mattered more than anyone ever said aloud.